Through a Scottish Prism, the programme that is unapologetically pro-Scottish independence and anti-Westminster rule. Everything we say here is viewed through a Scottish Prism. Brought to you by Barhead Boy.
Hi folks, welcome back to Through a Scottish Prism midweek specials. It's September, the summer is officially over, the Westminster Parliament went back this week, and we're back to 2 shows a week. You'll be glad to hear, well I hope you're glad to hear. And our midweek one, as always, will be about matters out with Scotland, but that will affect us either now or in the future when we're independent. So without further ado, let me bring in, of course, I've got my old friend Lloyd Quinnan here to help me in my midweek show as always. Lloyd, how are you, my friend?
I'm very well, Roddy, very well.
Good. It's been at least 2 days since we spoke or something. I can't remember now.
People will talk.
Exactly. And to help us along the way, because we're going to multipolarity and to BRICS, etc., and Ukraine war, I'm delighted to say we've got Dr. Finbar Markey with us again.
Hi, guys. Hello, Scotland and beyond.
Hello, Finbar. How are you?
All good, guys. All good. You're saying about the summer being over. The summer seems to be just starting here in Ireland. It's blue skies. The sun is splitting the trees.
Yeah. And you've had a good summer?
Kids are back to school. You're guaranteed a good end of summer.
Yeah. Well, it's good. So the weather's been, it's been a weird summer everywhere, I think. A weird summer everywhere. But anyway, our politicians are back in Westminster. Things are going on. Since we last spoke, Finbar, now you're an expert on what's all things happening in Ukraine. Now there's been, since we last spoke, there's been a counter-offensive began, which hasn't got very far. But can I just say before we start discussing this, because it happens all the time, I've made my position clear so many times. I'm anti-war. I'm against all wars. And since the day this war began, I've been shouting for a ceasefire. The day, well, I say escalated, from when it escalated in February of last year, which makes me pro-Putinist, pro-Xi Jinping, anti-Western, anti-democratic, makes me a fascist communist. It makes me all these bad things because I hate wars. But the fact is, because we are bringing you information that you're not getting, and that's why this programme, and it's people like us that are bringing, who are getting deplatformed, Finbar, who are getting demonetised, getting attacked, because the West do not want people to know the actual reality of what's happening, do they?
No, I think the first victim of war quite often is the truth. And there will be no peace. There'll certainly be no ceasefire until the revelations of the origins of this war are laid out to the public especially. And there's an acceptance of the origins of this war. The Russians didn't waken up one day and decide, oh, let's militarily go into Ukraine. That didn't happen, and it's nonsensical to suggest that it did. I get the same as you, Roddy, and Lloyd, probably you get a bit of it if you're in these conversations. You're pro-Putin, it's Russian talking points, things like this. But here's a reality, and I suppose we have to accept this. There are different importances put on our types of beliefs that we have. And we've been brought up since we were kids with James Bond movies, war, all this kind of stuff, telling us that the Russians are the enemy, the US are the good guys. And that's central to our inner working model of the world. And when you try to question that, you're actually committing a psychological offense on some people in a way, because genuinely they have a psychological reaction to it that sometimes they don't understand themselves, because you're pulling the rug from under them. This beautiful Disneyland world that we were brought up to believe existed, where we're the good guys and the other guys are the bad guys, and that's it. And a lot of people just can't take it. And I've met people in my time who, when I've said this to them, I know it's hard to accept this type of information. They actually they say, I don't want to know. And they actually tell you that they don't want to know. They don't want their inner romantic model of the way the world works. But the reality is, this war is expanding. And you were talking about the summer offensive. We're practically at the end of that offensive now. The Ukrainians are pulling in their final strategic reserves from the west, from Lviv and over in that area. It looks like they've got 3 or 4 weeks fight left in them. This can go 2 ways. On the one hand, this can bring this war to an end if there's enough will for it. But on the other hand, it could expand this war, because the Ukrainians are on their last men and their last bits of machinery. That's the reality of it. Everybody is starting to accept that now. They're starting a major mobilization campaign in Ukraine. They're actually talking about mobilizing or conscripting women into the Ukrainian army.
Yeah.
That's what they're talking
We've got a clip in that, or at least a meme in that. Can you stick that up while Finbar's talking, Techie? The one about the women that have been brought into the Ukrainian army. Sorry, Finbar, on you go.
So they've categorized groups of women that they want to take into the Ukrainian army. Zelensky and his government have announced and have communicated with all European governments requesting that they deport fighting age men back to Ukraine to die on the fighting fields. Now, these men clearly do not want to fight. That's why they left their homeland. That's why they left Ukraine in the first place. And now Zelensky wants them rounded up in my country, in Scotland, in England, in Wales, in France, right across Poland, I believe, have already started to send them to their ultimate death. We're talking about the summer offensive, 66,000 dead over the last 3 months in a failed counteroffensive by the Ukrainians. And we have a choice now, and the West has a choice in particular, to start genuinely urging for peace. Or on the other hand, this is going to expand because on the one hand, the Poles are sending those guys back to die, but they're also building up their own military. They've doubled the amount of troops that they have overall in the last 2 years, and they've doubled the amount of troops that they have on the Belarusian Polish border. And they're doing that with some intention. They've also spoken about cooperative security agreements between Poland and Ukraine. This could expand rather than die off unless the demand for peace grows. And that won't grow until people start hearing the truth. And there are some people watching this program this evening or tonight, whenever you watch this program, and automatically they'll think Putin talking points and they'll get angry about this. Well, my advice is to sate your anger and listen to everybody's point of view. You are not in a trench on the front lines with missiles going off all around you, with your friends in pieces all around you. And until you're in that position, I don't think you have a right, or anybody has a right, to urge further war. Sorry, that's my point on that. But it's just, I get you, and it is frustrating when people start saying, oh, you're a Putin apologist, you're a Russian apologist, when in reality, you're trying to bring some sense to madness.
Yeah, well, that is exactly it, Lloyd. As I said, one guy, genuinely really nice guy who I've known for a long while on social media, said, well, I agree with everything you say, Rod, except I can't go with your pro-Putinist beliefs. It's really, it is, as Finbar says, very frustrating. And it is, a lot of it does go down to the movies that we were shown in the propaganda. But it's real life. And now women up to 60 years of age, Lloyd, and 60 can be recruited into the Ukrainian army. It's scandalous. And a waste of life.
The whole thing is a waste of life. And we all know that ultimately, no matter what happens between now and that day, there will be peace talks. No one's conquering anything here. There will have to be peace talks. There will have to be an agreement and an arrangement between the Ukraine, Russia, and Belarus and Poland. There's absolutely no question about that. But central to this is the position of NATO. And I cannot for the life of me understand why NATO continues to suggest that there is merit in the Ukrainian cause. If any country is reduced to the conscription, particularly of anyone over 40, be they male or female, then they are in serious, serious trouble. You know, that's just a straightforward fact. I think the greatest tragedy for people in the West being unable properly to recognize what's going on is the sanitization of the reporting. I've said this on other programs, Roddy, that I've never seen so many clean uniforms. We only see small numbers of troops at any given time. We're not seeing what I grew up watching, the casualties from the Vietnam War on the 6 o'clock news every night. Everything is so sanitized that it's easy for people to just take a side. The whole idea that this war is the whim of a single individual is a narrative that's been used in the West against many, many people in my lifetime. You know, everything is the fault of the single individual. They control the minds and the motivations of all of their people, and therefore the people are as culpable as the dictator. And that's effectively what's happening here. All the Russian people are being treated in the same way as the Iraqis were treated because of the actions of Saddam Hussein. It's an absurdity. But the great tragedy is people are dying or continuing to die, both civilians and combatants. And in the end, we know there will be peace talks. My plea is those peace talks must begin as soon as possible. And all true humanitarians amongst the governments of the world must be pushing for this. Killing people is not a civilized way forward. It just is not.
No, is that I go back, and when I was calling for a ceasefire in Bar way back in February of last year, I said, and someone said, well, what's the basis? I said, the basis is the Minsk Accords, which if they had been adhered to, would have prevented this war. But the West used that against Russia. And again, I don't think the public and the people watching this understand how dishonest the West were, including, and later admitted by Merkel and Holland, that they had used the Minsk Accords to dupe the Russians.
I think the Minsk Accords are in the bin now as far as Russia is concerned. The Minsk Accords covered the Donbass region and the Luhansk region, and essentially it was an agreement not to further militarize those areas and to further attacks on either side in those areas. Minsk 1, there was two Minsk Accords. There was Minsk 1 and Minsk 2. Both of them were clearly breached continuously by Ukraine, particularly in January and February of 2022, which is why the Russians decided eventually that they had to go in, because it was quite clear they were softening up for an invasion. And what was, according to many Ukrainian officials, what was going to be the creating of free land, as the Nazis would have called it, in that area to populate by Ukrainians into the future. So Putin didn't really have a choice but to go in then. Minsk is gone now. Putin has made it clear from day one in the military intervention, he's made it clear that Ukraine now has to be demilitarized. Not just the Donbass region, Ukraine has to be demilitarized. And the Ukrainian government have to be committed, genuinely committed to a peace. We're not going back to the relationship we had between Russia and Europe. We're not going back to the relationship between Ukraine and Russia, because that has been destroyed. Putin has made some big mistakes in his time in government. And one of those mistakes was trusting Europe and the United States to the degree that he did. Investing in Nord Stream, he was warned by some of the more conservatives in his own government and within the Russian parliament that this was going to happen. But he actually had too much faith in the goodwill of the Europeans and the Americans, and that's where we're at now. So we're not going back there. And Russia's focus now is clearly to the east. It's China, it's Asia, it's Africa. And if I was in the same position and I had been stabbed in the back after doing so much over 20 years to build up those relationships, I'd be thinking the same way, to be honest with you.
Yep. There is, Lloyd, a lot of, like Tucker Carlson and a few others have been saying, well, you know, the next thing within a year, I can assure you, we're going to have boots on the ground and the Americans will go in because the Ukrainians will not be able to fight. Now, I hear that, but one of the things I'm thinking about is what they're going to fight with, Lloyd, because they've run out of ammo. And they're saying, you know, they had their excuse for sending cluster ammunition to Ukraine was that they didn't have enough 155 shells. So if they're going to put boots on the ground, what are they going to use for ammunition?
I have to say, Roddy, I think some of the boots on the ground talk from the United States is false. We're in the run-up to an election. Even Biden wouldn't be stupid enough to send soldiers into the Ukraine. I mean, I despair sometimes when with the American media. I really do. It seems to be less about the news and more about creating a kind of sense of chaos or creating a sense of fear. And I can't for the life of me genuinely believe that the Americans at this particular stage are prepared to ship troops to fight alongside the Ukrainians. I mean, effectively, that would be leading you to the ultimate defense condition. You know, you'd be on the brink of nuclear war, and I don't believe that is well, we know it's not in anyone's interests, but I don't believe it's on the cards. I think Tucker Carlson particularly is someone who's desperate to maintain a position. I prefer the interventions of former General McGregor, who looks at it from a very straight military perspective. His understanding of what's going on to me is
absolutely,
without doubt, percolated into the American military. This is not a man who's ignored by the American military at all. He's a thinker, and he's also an experienced military campaigner. American boots on the ground, I can't see it. I just can't see it. I really can't.
I've got to say, I'm the same with the McGregor. Colonel McGregor, you made him a general. I think he deserves to be a general. He's only a colonel. He's only a colonel. But you're right. He said in relative terms, the American army is a very small unit. They only, I mean, he figured, when he said, I think he said they could put 150,000 men into the field. They've got an army of about 400,000, but a lot of that's logistics. Putin's got 1 million, and it's moving up to about 1.25 million. So, you know, and they've got no ammunition problems whatsoever. But it leads me on one other thing on this, Finbar. I read another article this week where the Poles and NATO and the usual, what you would expect, are giving Belarus a hard time. And they said, you know, you've got to get these Wagenites out of your land. This is wrong. You shouldn't have these soldiers, foreign soldiers, on the doorstep of Poland and Lithuania. And Lukashenko said, well, I hear what you're saying, but you've got 50,000 American troops in Poland. You know, you've got American troops in Latvia. We're surrounded. So you get rid of all the foreign troops. There should be no foreign troops, I agree, in Eastern Europe. So you all get rid of your foreign troops. Oh, but suddenly, no, Lukashenko's got to go because he's talking sense and truth.
There's over 300,000 NATO troops along the Russian and Belarus border. 300,000. So that answers that question straight out. Just in terms of, you were talking about Colonel McGregor a moment ago. There was a couple of other. First of all, Colonel McGregor was the chief advisor to the president, military advisor at one point. So was always a colonel. Titles don't necessarily always reflect the knowledge, breadth, and experience of someone. There's another two colonels. There's a Colonel Wilkinson and another colonel, I think it's Adams. I could be wrong about the second colonel I'm talking about. They put out videos or were in interviews in the last 2 weeks. They were saying the very same thing. The first colonel was talking about Abrams tanks and the impact that they will have. And he said they'll have no impact in this battle, none whatsoever. The second colonel was talking about, Wilkinson was talking generally about the general progress of the counteroffensive in Ukraine's counteroffensive. And he said from start to finish, it has been an absolute disaster. So the retired US military senior officers all see the truth and are willing to speak the truth. In terms of American boots on the ground, there already are American boots on the ground. All they do is take off their US uniform, they get leave from the US armies, particularly officers. They take off their American uniforms to put on a Ukrainian uniform, but they still get paid with the same American dollars. So you have at least 2,000 troops on the ground as in officers and advisors. There have been a number of hits over the last 6 months on HQs, Ukrainian military HQs, that have taken out many NATO officers. So the idea that the boots are not on, they're on the ground, but they're on the ground as management teams, as opposed to soldiers in the trenches dying. So they are definitely on the ground. So overall, in terms of from the Russian side, from most retired American military, they're saying the same things. Although we're in our mind, we think they're enemies. They're actually saying about the progress of this war. They're saying the very, very same things. So we can listen to people like Tucker Carlson. I think Tucker Carlson's comments had two purposes in them in terms of American boots on the ground. A, get a bit of attention, but B, to warn off against the fact that this, although it might be a small possibility, it is a possibility because the administration in the White House at the moment are bloody nuts. They are insane. And they lack any type of a classical education whatsoever, any type, to have an understanding of history, an understanding of their own place. Finally, American boots on the ground. The one thing that I would say takes away from the idea of them going in is this, as in big time going in, is this. The Americans never fight anyone that's taller than their own ankles. They only pick wee tiny tribes and groups, and that's who they will go face to face with. But they can't afford to show that their so-called amazing military technology is second-hand kind of stuff compared to the Russians. The Russians can produce it. They can produce it in quality. I saw a video at the start of the counteroffensive in one of the British tanks, and the video, it had been hit, and you could see the plate of steel on the top of the tank was less than an inch thick. Would you go out in a tank with one of the plates on the top of it is only an inch thick? You know?
Well, you're absolutely right, but that's the thing. We spoke right at the beginning, Lloyd, how, we've been programmed with, the propaganda has been that the Americans are magnificent. The American always gets the girl. He's always the most intelligent. They always know what's going on. They don't play by the rules, but when it comes to action, they come together as a unit, like the militia did against the British back in the day. All this nonsense, and this technology is so far advanced they can do everything. I can't watch films anymore because the technology has been battered, bruised, and surpassed by the Russian technology. It really has. It's opened. It's like the Wizard of Oz. The curtain's been pulled back, Lloyd. We're not as big and tough as we think we are we?
Oh, there's absolutely no question about that. But then, what we fail to understand is that, as Finbar said, the assaults by both the American and the British military over the past 4 or 5 decades have always been on the little guy. What do they call it? Asymmetric warfare has been the nature of wars, which makes it look like you're winning and you can vanquish all before you. But I think that the real issue of what you just said, Roddy, is we've all been defeated by a culture war. A culture war that comes from the early days of Hollywood. Our understanding of America, I mean, I've spent a lot of time there, but, it's a very different place when you're there than the impression that you get from watching the movies. And it shows that the power of externalized American cultural imperialism, how powerful it has become, particularly in the West, in all parts, but particularly us in the so-called English-speaking countries. We do have a vision of white hats and black hats, and that has continued for decades, which leads us to this, Putin is the black hat, NATO and Zelensky are the white hat. And it troubles me that people can't get beyond that thinking. And I think maybe we are the generation that have been most subject to it because we're the post-Second World War generation, where both Hollywood, the British film industry, ramped up completely the nature of the Second World War. I sat down the other day and right, I'm getting off point here. But the fact is, American culture has influenced us all, even those of us that are critical. We cannot avoid the influence it's had for decades upon us.
Yeah.
Can I just make the point here that we're all guilty sometimes of saying Americans? Just to be clear, and I'm sure you all agree with me, this is about the American administrations. This is about
not the people.
Deep state. I was in Atlanta, Georgia a few years ago, and I had a medical event on the street. And the kindness of the regular people on the street. I actually had a similar event in Ireland where people walked past me, but which I didn't mind in a way. I was embarrassed. But in America, a crowd came around me to help me. Are you okay, bud? Can we help you, bud? So it's not the American people, and I'm sure you guys are on the same page here.
Absolutely.
It's that wicked administration that's raised from birth to be in the deep state.
Yeah, it's the same. I've got to say, it's the same as our Irish and Scottish and Welsh thing with our big neighbour. It's the establishment and the elite that are the problem, not the ordinary English folk. They're the same as us. They're struggling to get by, and they're getting lied and cheated to all the time. Exact same. But here, the whole thing about this Finbar is that it's not just this Ukraine war that's changed our concept and of things. The world has actually changed. This has been fuel in the fire to accelerate that change. I mean, we just spoke about it just before we come on, but if we just take Africa, in the last 3 years, we've had 7 coups where their colonial masters have been thrown out. And that would be, just make sure I don't get them wrong, Niger, Gabon, Mali, Burkina Faso, Sudan, Guinea, and I've missed one. Who have I missed? I've missed one. I can't think. Mali. Yes. They've all had coups and thrown out, and are starting to look for themselves. This just didn't happen overnight. This was, this has been building for a while, has it not?
I think Ireland has a history of whenever England went to war, we'd use it to our advantage. Their troops were being moved over to France, etc. So England's trouble is our advantage. And I'm sure many of those African nations, particularly the last three nations, Gabon, Mali, and Niger, I'm sure that they have seen an opportunity here. On the one hand, both Russia and the United States are seeking allies. And it was a great opportunity. I noticed that the Mali, I won't call it a coup, it's the government of Mali. That's what it is. It's the government of Niger. And I have seen protests and support for them on the street. In Mali, there was a poll done, an official poll, that 70% of the people supported the so-called coup. So as far as I'm concerned, right now, they are the people that you talk to if you go to talk to the government of Mali or Niger. They're the government at the moment. As soon as the Mali new government was in place, they made statements very much in support of Russia. And they internationally put their cards on the table that they were in support of Russia and that they were seeking Russian help. Lavrov, the Russian foreign minister, the day after the coup, made a statement that they condemned the coup, but that they were not calling for any intervention or any business like that. I think the first show I did with you, Roddy, I said that we are entering into the first genuine era of post-colonial development in Africa. We thought that the 60s, 70s, and 80s, but it wasn't, because the companies remained, the power imbalance remained. This is the first time where we're really seeing a breakaway. However, it's notable that in Mali, in Gabon, and I think in Niger, the soldiers that rebelled were actually American trained, particularly in Gabon. I know that we have the presence of Wagner in Niger and I think in Mali, but they're not in Gabon. And so the new government in Gabon, within a couple of days of taking power, they made statements to the effect that their enemy is not the United States. Their enemy is France. And so they're trying to focus in. They don't want the ramifications, that they don't want all Western countries piling on them at the one time. So they're looking at France. Now, we're being told that the Niger issue is about France and France's need for uranium. In reality, there's a gas pipeline being built from southern Nigeria, up through Nigeria, through Niger, which is a very large country, through Niger, through Algeria, up into Europe. And this pipeline is now endangered by the new government in Niger, and also those other governments as well that we've mentioned. So this development has global ramifications for the survival of Europe, because the plan was that they would replace cheap Russian gas with cheap, if not even cheaper, Nigerian gas, basically rob the Nigerian people, you know. So that plan is not coming to fruition the way they thought it would. So this has global ramifications. It fits into the wider perspective of what's happening in Pakistan, for instance, with the jailing of Imran Khan. He's been released, but there's a lot more charges to lay against Imran Khan too. We see it in Africa. We see it in Poland. We are slowly moving towards a situation where every country in this world is being forced to take a side. That's what happened at the beginning of World War I. Where are we going with this?
Well, let's hope not in the same way as the First World War. That would be it. Just doesn't bear thinking about.
But yet, the jigsaw pieces or the tectonic plates, if you put what happened between 1905 up to 1914 down, and then you put a map of what's happening now over it, a lot of those lines are on top of each other. They all seem very, very similar.
Yeah, it is a worry. It's a worry. But it is the common denominator, Lloyd, is the greed of the few. Both in the First World War and again now, it's the greed that's generating this.
Oh, there's absolutely no question about it. I mean, on the one hand, in the West, we have the elites telling everyone that we need to be more frugal, that we won't all be able to drive around in cars and so on in the future. And meanwhile, we're effectively plundering the countries of the South, particularly of Africa, for the benefit of the former colonial elites. I mean, I think there's an interesting situation has developed in the Sahel and the Maghreb, where and these are the places where there have been the military coups that have converted the governments. For the past 10 to 15 years, particularly the tribes of the Sahel and the Maghreb have effectively been holding the line against the Islamic fundamentalists of Daesh, with little or no support from the outside. I've met with one of the senior Tuareg leaders some time ago, and they were struggling to maintain their own front against Daesh, who were carrying out the same atrocities as they carried out in Syria and in Iraq, but they were not getting the support of their previous colonial masters. Indeed, there was interference that prevented the army of Mali and the army of Niger actually taking action against Daesh because of the interference of the French military advisors. And to some degree, what's happened over the past few months and those coups are a direct product of people coming to the conclusion that they can no longer, in any way whatsoever, even the elites in these countries, can no longer depend on their previous colonial masters to support them. So they've decided that they're going to do it for themselves, and the people demand it. The people demand that they should no longer be robbed simply to provide for the elites of the Northern Hemisphere. And that's what we're seeing. The greed of the North is coming back to bite it. It's simple and as straightforward as that. But what it means is we have to start addressing how we deal with the future world. And the future world is not just about the climate crisis. The climate crisis is a product of the actions of the Northern Hemisphere elites. So we're going to have to develop new relationships which are based on a genuine sense of respect and also an admission of the colonial follies of the past.
So just for a sec, I'm a director of a charity in Ireland, and we have a charity shop, just a wee local thing. And there's guys come in, African origin guys come in, and they buy bicycles, they buy whatever they can, all secondhand stuff, and they fill containers and they send them back to Africa. And one day I stopped this guy and I said to him, "How are you making money from that?" And he said, "We produce nothing in Africa. All the materials, the source material, are taken from Africa, sent to Europe, converted into whatever they're going to be turned into, and we'll get them back secondhand. And that's the way it works. When it's been used by the white kids, we'll get the old bicycle back." But he said they'll pay the same price for the bicycle in Africa, the secondhand old bike, as we would pay for the new one in terms of relativity. So they produce nothing, and that's by design. Ireland, for centuries under English rule, we had a colonial economy, which meant we'd grow the cattle, for instance. We'd send the cattle live over to England. They would slaughter it. They'd send the leather back. We would buy the leather back, turn it into shoes. Then we'd send it back over to England, and then England would send the shoes back over to us to buy. Clark's, all these top range shoes. It's a colonial economy. It's the way it works. Africa probably has been the biggest victim of all of the countries to this type of a colonial, because they literally produce nothing. And that's by our design, not theirs.
Yeah, I just to get in for some putting a local advert, if I may, because just as we're talking about what happens to Africa, there's a lot of people in Scotland and Wales who do not accept that we're colonies of England. And those things we're talking about in Africa are maybe more extreme. But the same's happening. Welsh water is taken into England and sold back to the Welsh at a greater price. Our oil and gas and electricity, we pay higher prices than anyone else in Europe. And yet we're energy rich. Yeah. So it's happening to us. And those of you who deny that we're a colony or treated like a colonised nation, you need to think again.
But I think just add to that, Roddy, we used to blame a country for it, but really it's companies who have their origins and their centres in a particular country. So in Ireland, for instance, we produce a massive amount of gas off the west coast, and yet our gas prices are the highest in Europe. It's our gas. So it's the exact same point here, but it's companies rather than, sometimes we point the finger at our whole country. It's not the whole country. It's greedy companies and their lobbyists that they have in government.
Correct. Well, that's what the problem you've got in America, because the military-industrial complex, 90% of the people that are in Congress or in the Senate are funded by the military-industrial complex. Yeah. And that's why America's only had 18 years of peace in its entire history. But I'm going on, Finbar, to say that the things that, how the world is changing is, I noticed that both President Putin and President Xi Jinping are not bothering to go to the G20. They're sending underlings because they say it doesn't have any significance anymore. That the BRICS is where it's to be at. That, again, is another signal they're sending to the rest of the world. The Western hegemony is failing.
Yeah. I think apart from anything else, that G20 was going to be a whole Ukraine festival. And I just don't think that the Chinese or the Russians were willing to sit through the crap and the propaganda. And maybe Zelensky coming on to do a little piano show playing with his private parts again, or whatever he does. So I think that's old hat. The Chinese are very serious people. To rise up in the Chinese government, it's a meritocracy. You don't just get voted in China, that's it. You are chosen and voted through the party system, but it depends on a meritocracy. How well you've done in your department. What is your expertise? So they're not into this propaganda, flowery talk for the sake of flowery talk. They're serious people. BRICS is where it is at. BRICS is the future for China. It's the future for Russia. Hopefully the future for India, because one of the letters represents India. India is kind of, doesn't know where it stands at the moment, I think. But I wouldn't see it as much as a snub. A snub would suggest that your action was purely to spite the other side. I think they're busy people. They don't have time for that crap anymore. They're busy.
Yeah, I mean, India, in BRICS has got one of the highest GDPs, a far higher GDP than the UK. But it's resulting in de-dollarization, Lloyd, and just quickly for people to understand that the reserve currency was the dollar, which was used for all trade, for all nations. That's now dying. And what if I just quote Foreign Secretary Lavrov, who actually, if you get that thing, if you were a night out in a pub, who would you like? I'd love to have Lavrov. He looks to me like a right good laugh. He smokes, drinks, and seems a good fella. I think he'd be great company. I like him. And, as long as he brought along Maria Sharapova, the foreign spokesman, she's an absolute darling. But that's another story. Lavrov said neither Russia or the BRICS countries set out to kill the dollar. It was the United States itself that caused it by all its own actions. Is that a fair shout?
I think that's an absolutely fair shout. And I think it's not a statement for propaganda purposes. I think it's an understanding. And I get the sense, and the same as Finbar said, the Chinese have a long view of the world. They think in centuries, not in decades. That's very much why they've got themselves to the place they're at. And I think that has rubbed off on Russia since the collapse of the Soviet Union, is that they are beginning to see things in that same perspective. But I also think, and it's a really important point, education and the levels of education in both China and Russia are higher than they are in the West, particularly amongst our elites. The Western elites are taught particular beliefs and systems which have been repeated over generations since the mid-19th century. The Chinese and the Russians have a further greater experience of history as it is today. They also understand that you have to do your research. You can't just walk into somebody's room and say, I'm sorry, move that sofa, move that television, move this, do that, do this. That's not how they operate. They operate on a basis of understanding. They respect people when they enter into talks. And that certainly is not the way America has behaved. And as a result of that, it has made enemies, not just in military terms, it's made enemies culturally, because it doesn't respect people. And of course, in the end, if you try to be the dominant currency, you try to be the dominant nation in the world, or country or state in the world, there will come a day when it is your dusk and that night is falling and it's getting dark for you. And that's the position we're in with America. In the same way as, Britain had to wake up in 1949 and it still hasn't woken up, if truth be told, but in 1949, the sun set on the empire. This is what's happened. Nothing remains. A book I'm reading at the moment is about the events in Central Europe in the 14th, 15th, 16th centuries, the times of things where people believed would never change, like the Hanseatic League, the European Union of its time. Solid, powerful, over 200 years in existence, and then it fell apart. America, because of its own foreign policy and its desire to dominate the economies of the world, has made so many enemies. This day was coming, and now it's beginning to happen. The dollar will diminish and will no longer be the world backup currency.
And this war, This war is mitigating the immediate impact of the de-dollarization that has happened so far, because they're spending money on military equipment and they're forcing other countries. So the impact of de-dollarization is not as stark as it will be when this war comes to an end. So as an example, all the European countries gave military hardware. They have to replace that hardware. The Americans, when I say gave, they sell it. They don't give it, they sell it. The same with the Americans. They've sold so much, and there's so much sold into the future. There's 10 years worth of armaments in the process of having been ordered, in the process of being made or starting to make it, 10 years worth. So that will buoy the US economy. Now, the Republican minority speaker, Senate minority speaker, Congress speaker, what's his name, Mitch McConnell, 2 weeks ago, was reported in CNN as saying that this war is great. He didn't use that word exactly, but he said the war, there's been no American lives lost, he said, and it's great for the economy and it's creating jobs. So that's one of the takes that the Americans have. So de-dollarization is happening, which means that more and more countries are refusing to use the petrodollar to buy energy. But the dollar was then being used to buy other stuff on a massive scale as well, foodstuffs and things like that. All the countries, the BRICS countries and countries that aspire to joining BRICS, which is the majority of the world in reality, they're all either negotiating, and some of them already have dropped the dollar for a lot of their trade. The military spending is going to mitigate what seems to be a drop in the dollar. When this war is over, the dollar is buggered. They have to keep this war going and maybe start a few more wars if they want the dollar to maintain.
You mentioned, Lloyd, about education being an important thing. I wrote there, I said, before the Ukraine war, it was actually when people were attacking Alex Salmond for having an RTV show back in October 21. It was who really are the bad guys. And in education, if you look at in Russia, because and again, for the propaganda we're talking about, we're led to believe that the Russians are these big guys with no necks, tattoos, thick as you know, in the neck of a bottle. But the reality is something like 97% of Russians have a degree or higher education. They're a highly educated population. In America, where it's costing you about 100 grand to go to uni, so only those and such as those can go, they're right down to the privates. So these guys that are winning this war just now in the Ukraine, they're highly educated. They're not fools.
No, they're not. I mean, I'll give you. Here's an example of the Russian education system circa, well, it was the Soviet system at the time, actually, circa 1980. I went to Moscow and Leningrad with the Scottish-Russian Friendship Society for Burns Night. And one of the first things that we had to do when we arrived in then Leningrad was to judge a painting competition in a primary school for paintings that were inspired by the works of Robert Burns. Right, 9 and 10-year-old children who painted pictures of Tam O'Shanter, of To a Mouse, and things like that. Right, I don't think I was a Russian poet being taught in Scottish schools that particular year. Second thing, I was asked to, when I was a theatre director, I was asked to take some Russian theatre students on a tour of Glasgow. And at one point during the tour, this very intelligent young woman who spoke 5 languages said to me, "So will you be showing us the poorhouse?" I was mystified by this. And I said, "What do you mean?" She said, "Well, I have read Charles Dickens, and your poor people are in the poorhouse. Why are you not showing us this?" And I said, "Well, we don't live in Dickensian times." And then she said to me, "You're definitely covering something up, because the nature of your capitalist country, you would not," because I said, we have social security now instead of the poorhouse. And she said, no, in a capitalist country like yours, you would not have that. I understand your economics. It was astonishing. Here we had, in 2 separate circumstances, people who had probably a greater, a misguided understanding, but a greater understanding of our culture than we had of theirs. And I think that's the example we have to recognize is we look in, or we look to America. Russia and China look out, while at the same time being absolutely solid in their own cultural background. But they recognize you need to respect outside. Education is what it's about. You don't have a 2-tier education system in China or in Russia. in the United Kingdom, as it stands at the moment, we have a two-tier education system that creates the elite at the age of 5. And that has to change. We will never move forward as a country, properly move forward as a unified country with a divided education system that creates the elite in primary 1.
Yeah, I agree with you. On that, and I'll put in the link below, folks, this particular article. You can read it again. But in America, and I used American statistics so I wouldn't be accused of, again, this is before the war, I've been a pro-Putinist or a commie or a whatever. But this is from the National Centre of American Educational Statistics. 21% of American adults are illiterate or functionally illiterate or educated up to what we would call primary 6 level. Whereas in Russia, they have youth literacy of 99.7 and elderly literacy of 99.5. So who are the fools? That's just facts. But on this BRICS and BRICS expansion, Finbar, it definitely is the way forward. I mean, there's 6 new nations coming this year, and there's another 30 queuing up. There are 2 blocks, as you indicated, in this world. And it seems to me the BRICS are a bit more enlightened nations than the ones that we're in.
Yeah, I think BRICS is the producer. All the BRICS countries have the resources and they're into the production, particularly China. China, as an example now, depends on nothing from the West. As you've probably seen in the news in the last couple of days, Hawaii's new phone that have come out, the Pro 60, I think it's called, and it has a 7 nanogram chips in it, which until recently they had to import from Western countries. They've developed that technology now, so they don't need anything from us. Scotland and it may be in the position into the near future, if Scotland got independence, that it'd have a choice to join the EU. I think that would be a very bad idea. It'd be jumping from the frying pan into the fire. The reason being, the EU will never allow a member state to have its own talks with a BRICS country on the issue of BRICS membership into the future. It will never happen. Ireland is trapped in the EU at the moment. We have no foreign policy of our own. We have no economic policy of our own. It's all controlled by Brussels. Every time the Irish population complain about something, they're told, oh, we can't do it. We're signed up to legal agreements with the EU. So we have no input into anything. And BRICS is so important. BRICS is the future. They are just the producers, and that's just it. We are the consumers. We produce crap. We produce services. Or on the other hand, we try to multiply greasy money upon greasy money out of the till. That's what we do. We don't produce anything. We don't realize those. It's almost like we're kings in a palace surrounded by servants, and we don't realize that if those servants walk out someday, we don't even know how to boil the kettle. And that's the truth of the matter. So BRICS is where it's going. Just because of the name of this show, Through Scottish Prism, we may be looking towards BRICS into the future. If Scotland does get its independence, don't join the EU. You're just going to be back to square one.
No, after the square to be, so you've got access to the single market, but you're not then restrained by all the other things. That's definitely the way.
They say access to the free single market, but it's quite the opposite. That's just language. It's actually exclusion from the rest of the world. That's what it actually is.
Yeah. Well, here we are. The other thing I noticed again this week, the Chinese are leading the world in electric cars and technologies, Lloyd. And I remember, I'm old enough to remember when I had a transistor radio and I was laughed at because it was Japanese. You need a Ferguson's or a good old
Bush.
Loud Punk or a Bush or something. Now you wouldn't take one in a lucky bag, It's going the same with China. Their cars, it's the same with their actual car manufacturing. They're now the biggest car manufacturer in the world.
Yeah, but why is anybody surprised by this? It is our ignorance of, China gave us paper. China gave us gunpowder. China gave us the ability to navigate the seas. They said, but they did that 600 years ago. The huge advances that we put down to the Renaissance, in reality, it's now emerging, are a direct product of the communication of information from China to Venice and other countries at the beginning of the Renaissance. This is becoming clear. The Chinese, it's a huge country with an incredibly deep history, but a deep history based on a philosophy. I mean, the astonishing thing that's led China to where it is now is that marriage of the concept of state socialism with Confucianism, with a recognition backwards to their history, to gathering their ability to gather information from the past to aid them to see the future, which is, I think, exactly the way they describe it, is the inclusion of Confucian thinking into the Central Committee of the Communist Party of the People's Republic of China, has led to this massive change. Who coped better than anybody else in the world with the collapse of the Soviet Union? China is the one that recognized what was coming, what was needed, and took the action. But then again, their central and key understanding, which leads them to where they're going now, being the largest manufacturer of cars, being a developing green economy, is the fact that they see things in longer than a 5 or a 6 year electoral cycle. They see things as they have goals which are 100 years hence. They are committed to providing for their people, committed to improving the lives of their people in a way that can genuinely only come by bringing in all the influences that are around you from abroad and from your own past. That's why they're speeding ahead. It's not anything other to do with that. We get the impression here in the West that there is constant compulsion. Everything is about compulsion, both in Russia and in China, that people are forced to do things. No, they're not. The people love what's happening. I mean, I look in the streets of Edinburgh. To see a Chinese tourist in Edinburgh 20 or 30 years ago was very unusual. In every month of the year, there are large groups of Chinese tourists in the capital city of our country. And that's just the reality. Now, how does that square with? These are people who are controlled. These are people who are compelled at all times and must obey. It doesn't fit anymore, which is why BRICS is successful, and it's beginning to change the nature of our world.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you're right. But I mean, in fact, I think the Great Wall of China was built, I don't know, how many thousand years ago was the Great Wall of China built? And it's still standing and looking as sturdy as ever. We built schools 30 years ago and they're having to close them down because they're collapsing.
There's one section of the wall was knocked over the last few weeks, wasn't there? Some builders decided to take a shortcut and they put a bulldozer through a section of the Great Wall of China. They've been arrested for it, but they actually did that. I think they might have been Irish.
Yeah, but probably short. But the other thing, it was the same, this knee-jerk reaction when Renault and Citroën and General Motors all stormed out of Russia because of the invasion of Ukraine. I think expecting that they would be back in a few months when the Russians the economy collapsed. And all that's happened is that the Russians have taken over some of these factories, and the Chinese have taken over a couple as well in Russia. And instead of having a Renault badge, it's got I don't know.
McDonald's has improved
a Moscow badge on it, but it's a Renault car to every way, shape, or form. Yeah. I mean, the stupidity and the arrogance. They believe their own publicity.
Here's the thing. I don't know. Was it a congresswoman? Somebody wrote an article about 6 months ago about TikTok. And they said that the Chinese government had put a bug into TikTok to make American kids look at shit. Pardon for the language, while Chinese kids are looking at educational stuff and fun stuff. And they don't realize it's actually a reflection of what the American kids want to look at, because it all works on algorithms. And so the American children's demand is for trash, whereas the Chinese kids' demand is for stuff that's educational, that opens up their mind, that inspires them. And that's where in terms of the non-reflectiveness or the non-reactionary attitude of the Chinese to things, where they're so calm, that's the Confucian element of it. That you don't just knee-jerk to things. There was a time, Mao and just after Mao, everything was a knee-jerk reaction to something. None of that now. Everything. You want to start a fight with a Chinese leader, you can shout and roar at him. He won't even blink at you. He'll walk away and they'll have a talk about it in the back room. That's the way they're working. So it does come down to education, but it also comes down to seeing that life is about more than the self. And that's where the capitalist American attitude to things, I think, is really gone wrong. That it's all about the self-pleasure, self-gratification. Am I happy today? Do I feel that I've been identified enough today? Whereas in Russia and in China, it's about the collective. It's about, listen, you may be gay and you have every right to be gay in a way. None of our business. For instance, that attitude, none of our business. You can bring into the social life what is social, and work together and respect. And so even from day one in the education system, it's not about the self. It's about the collective and moving forward and treating people with respect and building on what we have and self-respect. In the United States and unfortunately in Europe, it's about self-pleasure.
No, absolutely. There is no society. One of the other things in this, Lloyd, that's going on just now is in the de-dollarization. Is one at the moment they're using local currencies for trade deals, oil purchases, etc. But what they're moving towards is a BRICS currency. And this week I was reading Iran in the first quarter bought 4.1 tons of gold. That's 13 tons in the last 12 months. Russia and China are buying up gold, and this currency is going to be backed by gold. It's one of Phil's favourite conversations about fiat currency. And it goes back to the BRICS nations are going to have a currency backed by gold, and they're going to be in a manufacturing and natural resources. What have we in the West got to compete with that? The answer is nothing.
Well, here in Scotland, we have.
Mm-hmm.
We are energy rich, both in carbon base and indeed in wind and water power. These are things, and we've got a gold mine.
Exactly.
We
have indeed.
We have indeed. Well, we always have had, but it's always kept very quiet to us. I believe that things are changing in such a way that we, as an oil producer and as an energy producer, an overall energy producer, were we independent, we would find ourselves in a circumstance where we could trade without having to trade using the petrodollar. It hasn't been good for them, but Venezuela has done that over a period of time while under enormous sanctions from the United States. But let's not get ahead of ourselves here. A return to the gold standard would be astonishing. And again, Scotland plays a part in, why did Britain come off the gold standard in the 1930s? Because there was a mutiny of the Navy in Invergordon. Here in bonny Scotland, we forced Britain to come off the gold standard. It wasn't the action of the Scots; it was the action of very, very upset Royal Navy men. But people tend to forget that Britain has been operating on a fiat currency for a lot longer than most believe it, and to some degree, because the British, or rather the English London economy, the southeast of England London economy, is about the buying and selling of money and nothing else, then you don't really want to be tied to a gold standard if that's what you're going to be selling, because shorting and selling on currency, you don't require the gold support in any way whatsoever. I think one of the interesting things about BRICS going back to a gold standard, apart from the fact that that's always been a more solid concept in the eyes of certainly the southern hemisphere rather than the north for a long period of time, it also means that you guarantee the involvement of particularly South Africa, because South Africa is the largest gold producer outside of Russia. In fact, but it is the largest gold producer, and in some ways that harnessing of that natural resource will give the basis and the power to BRICS, which G7, G20, or G whatever you want to call it, doesn't have, because it's dependent entirely on fiat currency.
Yeah, it's having all that oil, gas, and gold. We're so lucky, Lloyd, that we've got those broad shoulders of the UK who look after that terrible affliction of having all that oil, gas, and gold. God bless England for taking care of that for us. That's very kind of them.
It's fantastic. What a benefit.
Oh, what? Last thing here. When the Brits left India and Ireland, there's the same token, we could come up with examples of that, but India was absolutely on its knees. It had been raped, it was impoverished. And here we are now. Indians are one of the leading nations on economy. It's the 5th largest economy in the world, Finbar, and they're now into the space race. They launched a rocket. They've got one of the largest navies in the world. It just shows you, as an island where they've now got the best GDP in the British Isles, etc. And you get rid of London, life can get better. And it's the same if you get rid of Washington, life could be better.
I just be careful about those comparisons. I was in India a few years ago, and I was in New Delhi. I didn't plan to go over. A friend of mine was going over, and he asked me to go with him. I didn't have the money to go myself. I'm a pauper, but we went over anyway, and we stayed in what was described. The name of it was New Delhi. You'd expect something new in it, wouldn't you? It was falling apart. People were dying and starving on the streets. I spent my whole time handing out food to people for my whole week there, and it was a horrific experience. The people were lovely, but the poverty is still there. And I don't think India. I think the spaceship thing was basically a new.
Have you been in Los Angeles recently?
Have I been where?
Los Angeles recently.
No, but I've seen the videos as well. But just to make the point that I think your own people should be more important in the space race, and the Indian space race, I think, really is about getting a new hat to wear to the races to show off more than anything else. In terms of Ireland and its GDP is a joke. Most of Ireland's GDP is actually from owned by foreigners. That's what GDP is. So it's private companies that operate in Ireland that use the Irish financial services to money launder and to put money through Dublin, through the Irish financial centre. But if you can half the GDP is a more realistic figure in terms of how much is hedge betting and things like that. The GNP is a better figure. And even then, if you can't get a home in Ireland, the housing crisis in this country has gone on for 10 years now. We have a situation where every month our homeless numbers go up. We've had a population of just over 4 million. It's gone up by nearly 1 million because of asylum seekers and that, or economic migrants coming in. Let's be realistic about it. But you cannot get a house in Ireland. People who are working, two couples working, good wages, can't get a house, can't afford a house. There's no houses available anyway. Our services, everything in Ireland costs twice as much as anywhere else in Europe. So this idea, and again, we went from the pot to the frying pan. We went from England controlling us in London to Brussels. So we still have no control. And a lot of, I meet people, so I'm a real working class guy. I spend a lot of time on the markets, as in not the financial markets, actual market. I run a homeless charity, things like that. So I meet people on the ground all the time. And half them are just exasperated to the point of depressed, and the other half are about to explode with frustration and anger about their living conditions and about what's going on in this country at the moment. So leaving Britain to join Brussels was not a boon or a benefit to us. Ireland has lots of gold mines right across, particularly up in the north. We have gas, we have some oil as well, we have loads of zinc. And the best thing that any country can have is people with hands and feet. If you have hands and feet and a bit of clay in the ground, you will make an economy. You'll make it happen. The reason the Americans made it happen was rather than working with their hands and feet, they decided to pop over next door and rob them. That's what the Americans. But once you have a population with hands, feet, and a bit of self-respect, you will build an economy. But linking into the likes of Brussels or London and feeling that they're in some way your guide in this, that they're here to help you, that's a foolish attitude to have. And your ontology is completely wrong if that's the way you view the world, to my mind.
There you go. We've got to, I think BRICS is the future. I'm really going to be called a pro-Putinist now. I'm going to be in big trouble. I definitely think BRICS has appealed to me, but whether we'll ever be able to achieve that remains to be seen.
Well, I actually believe that Scotland, Ireland, possibly Wales, Scotland, Ireland, Wales, Spain possibly got a good. There's a place there. So we'll look at BRICS, for instance. What we'll find in BRICS is cliques are going to develop in BRICS because every large international organization will develop cliques. Certain groups of countries will have an opinion on one aspect of something, and there'll be a group of countries within the same organization that has a different opinion. There's no harm in Ireland, Scotland, Wales, maybe France, maybe Portugal, maybe Spain, actually having a chat together about what can we do together. Maybe exclude France from it because they're as a part of the Brussels problem in a way. But those other countries could start talking together.
That's our old alliance, the French, you know. I mean, we can't. We've got to have our French buddies with us, not Irish buddies.
The French were never for us. The French were only using us as a battering ram on England. Always was.
Well,
when Wolfe Tone was up in the dock,
I'm with Finbar in that way.
When Wolfe Tone was in the dock in 1803, I think it was, his speech really had to emphasize, because he was being accused of being a traitor working for France. And he was making the point that any working with the French was done as a tactic, but that this was been done in Ireland's name for Ireland's freedom and Ireland's sovereignty. The French, with the likes of Macron involved, wouldn't trust him as far as I could throw him.
So before we go, Finbar, how do you see this war coming to a close anytime soon?
I see an opportunity, but I have a feeling it's going to be an opportunity lost. There's an opportunity when Ukraine, as I said, they've got weeks left of men and machinery, and they will have to have a winter pause. They'll say they're pausing for winter because it's raining. Did you ever hear such rubbish? Then the Battle of Kursk, did they stop because there was a bit of rain? You know what I mean? Battles go on. They're going to stop because they have to mobilize, conscript, and they have to get a few 100,000 people who don't want to die and force them to the front line after a few weeks of crap training. So there's an opportunity. But I think the only way, Zelensky and his government have dug themselves so much into a hole that they can't get out of it, and they have to go. The only way for peace and negotiations is for people who've said they're open to peace and who haven't dug themselves into an obstinate hole. Only those type of people are going to bring peace. Zelensky and that has to go for peace to happen. But there is a window.
Yeah, I'm sure the Americans will remove Zelensky the way they did their pal Hussein and a few others. That's how they'll get rid of Zelensky. How about you, Lloyd? Do you see any end to the conflict in the East?
I take the same position as Finbar. There's an opportunity here, but I think if the opportunity is not taken, if there is the winter break, which there will be, and it is a false break, as Finbar says, it's a false concept, then I could see it restarting again in the spring. But somebody has to make some sense out of this. Someone has to pull the heads together. I mean, I know that there have been offers from various places, but until, and I think Finbar is absolutely correct, until you have Zelensky and those who are controlling him out of the picture, including the defense minister who just stole $4 million to buy a house for his daughter, until these people are out of the way, then the poor working people of Ukraine will be sent into the Russian meat grinder yet again. And
there's one important final point here, and that's that Biden fella and the Biden family. And here's the problem. If the Zelensky government fell tomorrow and an actual, genuine, authentic democratic government was in place in Kiev, all Biden's secrets would come back out. Remember, Biden had the Attorney General, essentially, of Ukraine fired. Yes, he stood on a stage and he boasted about it, that this guy was investigating Prism, which would have revealed what the Bidens were up to. And Biden stood on a stage boasting about having that man fired. Well, here's the thing. This war stops tomorrow. Biden's in danger of that information coming out again. Biden and the Biden family have to keep this fight going until he's in a big wooden box on the way to the graveyard. Biden will keep this going for as long as he can. Yeah,
well, I just wonder if in particular, people like the Germans have had enough and that the Europeans take a different route or view. But it is a mess, and I'll say it again, I want an immediate ceasefire and negotiated settlement. No more deaths. Sooner or later, there's got to be jaw, as opposed to war, as Churchill said. And I hope it happens soon. And I will continue to call for a ceasefire. And all of you calling me a pro-Putinist, call me what you like. I'm a peacenik. Gentlemen, I once again thank you for your time, your wisdom, and your insight. I hope you people watching have enjoyed it as much as I have talking to the chaps here today. Let's hear what you've got to think about it. Let's hear your comments. And until we see you again, please, take care.
Bye-bye, guys.
Bye.
Through a Scottish Prism, the programme that is unapologetically pro-Scottish independence and anti-Westminster rule. Everything we say here is viewed through a Scottish prism. Brought to you by Barhead Boy.